Criticizing Neoclassical, reflection of social and economic condition of its time. And this is the second question and continuation of the report of Hazel Botanas. So the question is, how did neoclassical economics reflect the social and economic condition of its time? So another critique is on the assumption of neoclassical, where there will be growth, reduced possibility of unemployment, and general equilibrium. General equilibrium means it shows how supply and demand interact and tend toward a balance in an economy of multiple markets working at once. So, for example, ang general equilibrium is the balance of supply and demand. For example, ang supply is daghan kaayo. Ilahan nga pa-move-an ang price para dili ra pod mag-stock ang grabe nga kadaghan nga supply o para ma-distribute siya sa mga tao ug dali tungod ana nga change of price. And if ang supply pod is gamay ra pod kaayo, ilaha pod na nga pamahalon para dili ra pod dali mahurot ang supply. And this is to eliminate some potential buyers and encourage some marginal producers, which leads to economic equilibrium. And this is the neoclassical vision. However, when the time neoclassical were conceived, Great Depression occurred and negative growth followed. The economists of the countries in which the theorists lived were characterized by profound disequilibrium. So in contrast, disequilibrium is when external forces cause a disruption in a market supply and demand equilibrium. In response, the market enters a state during which supply and demand are mismatched. So, one might also ask, what was the relationship between general equilibrium theory and socio-economic reality at the time equilibrium theory was being taught? So, ang tanawon karon dinhi ang relationship sa general equilibrium theory o ang social-economic reality. How, unsa ang relationship niya kung mubaba ba or naabay, unsa ang effect ani sa way of living sa tao and effects sa economic sa tao. So one of the example of this is often referred to as the Great Depression or sometimes the Long Depression because of its low growth rates and intermittently high unemployment rate. So the Great Depression had a devastating effect on both rich and poor countries. Personal income, tax revenue, profits, and prices dropped while international trade fell by more than 50%. Unemployment in the US rose to 23% and in some countries rose as high as 33%. So in conclusion, at the time of neoclassical economist formulation of general equilibrium theory, the economy of the countries in which the theorists live were characterized by profound disequilibrium, in which general equilibrium theory enta ilahang vision. Markets could not keep the factors of production. In other words, like its classical predecessor, neoclassical economics not only misrepresented reality but also totally reversed it. Aside from that, J.B. Clarkson also criticized neoclassical economics by his normative prescription, which says that factors, which is people, were worth whatever the market accorded them in remuneration, which means that the market already determined the compensation of that specific job. For example, sa imong nga trabaho, inana kada ka imong nga sweldo. So, nanay mo specific nga sweldo sa ana nga trabaho. Ingon siya, industrial CEOs were worth hundreds of times what workers were, and financiers were worth tens or hundreds of times where CEOs were. In conclusion, through Clark's questionable normative prescription, neoclassical economics thereby perpetuated the class prejudice of classical economics. Only this time, it justified economic inequalities through reference to natural law. So, na-justified ang economic inequalities through aning natural law. Kay tungod sa natural law, nakadefine ng compensation anang specific nga job. And this was truly science for the rich. So those are the critiques of neoclassical economics on the topic of reflection of social and economic condition of its time. So thank you for listening.